Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to do the Peripheral, Season 1, Episode 5. So, I think a lot of people are really just wanting a reprieve from a lot of dialogue in this episode that really just goes nowhere. In this episode, we are to not only go on and give you a crap ton of really good action, but also, they actually explain things. They explain things? What do you mean by that? So, for those of you who were to have gone on and watched prior episodes and seen Flynn in Burton's Poid, or Avatar as I like to state it, she of course had gone on and Flynn done all these missions. They go on and actually explain in this episode why Flynn had gone on and done those missions and what the heck was that weird, goofy, like mechanism thing that looked like a pyramid that was upside down. Like, what the heck was that all about? The thing that Flynn had to go on and scan her eye, what was the point of that? They go on and explain it, and so I'm like, okay, this is interesting. So, we also get to freaking understand who was and what was Grace all about. I was like, okay, like, who the F is Grace? Why should we care? They make us realize why we should care within this episode of why she was, because Grace was the one person who basically told West, like, what's going on with this company that she's a part of, and maybe Grace is kind of giving Wes the hint. It's like, maybe you should go on and try to get to destroy this company because they're putting forth some really bad things. So we also are to go on and really have Flynn, because she has consistently been running around trying not to die from an assassin that ends up getting a backstory in this episode. I'm like, backstory? In the other prior times we've seen assassins come in here, like, they just show up and it's just like, hey, I'm here, I'm gonna shoot you. This episode, they go out of the way to build up an assassin called Bob, who ends up getting his own backstory. So it's like, okay, that was pretty awesome. But then we end up going on and having us go like, well, wait a minute, like, I want to see what happens to Bob by next episode. That's what I want to see next. Especially with how this episode ends. So we go on into this episode, and it seems that Billy Ann Baker seems to have a much more stronger presence. If she was just kind of a person that was just kind of like, oh yeah, Flynn just told Billy Ann her secret that she's getting stuff from the future. And it seems that now Billy is to go on and really actually help out Flynn in this episode. And also it seems that Flynn and both Burton are going on and telling more people what's really going on in this episode, to the point of even needing to have Flynn and Burton go on and tell their mother what's going on. Because, of course, she ends up finding something out, and then we have, of course, Flynn and Burton's mother is like, well, okay, like, I need to know what's happening. So, anyways, we have Flynn that goes right for the jugular also in this episode, to the point of Flynn going on and confronting Charisse in this episode. Charisse, of course, is to have been the villainous character that has been tied to Daniel for the last couple of episodes. Come to find out, Daniel will go on and kind of do his own little mission in this episode. That is to go on and be tied to a character, let's just say. So trying as much as possible to be vague, but also realizing there's a lot of stuff that I can go on and just kind of state here to kind of really tee up this episode. So this episode, I would state that this episode has been way better than a lot of episodes in the past. I would say that it's probably a, like, almost, I want to say probably in somewhere in between, like, solid okay or good, simply because, like, I've needed this kind of episode because all the episodes before were awful and boring, with the exclusion of the pilot and the early episodes where they had, like, the missions and it felt more like the gaming scenario and so on and so forth. So definitely, if somebody has fallen off from the show, I guess episode 5 would give people really all the interest to come back to the show, but, like, you also just have to muddle through a lot of just boring dialogue. And also, when really thinking about it, do you think that we're not gonna just go on and get more boring dialogue in the episodes to follow until the show ends? More than likely. I'm assuming we're gonna go right back into, like, dialogue you to death because, like, well, hey, we, like, people desperately need a reason to come back to this show. But then, like, if the rest of the show is just some boring dialogue slog of whatever, then I'm gonna be like, well, like, what was the point of even giving us any action in episode 5 when all the other episodes after that were just gonna be, like, the boredom. So, anyways, so just letting everybody know what's kind of going on here. So, with that said, let's just go on into the double 5 time territory so I can go on and be more specific about what happens in this episode. So with that said, let's go on into that double 5, because it's about that time, yet again, to of course go into spoiler time, it's about that time you spoil this episode. So, I honestly really want to get into the Bob story, but, like, I really gotta get into boring things, which of course is the dialogue that happens in the beginning of the episode. But that dialogue does go on and explain stuff from prior episodes, so we have to take the good and take the bad and have life from what we've had, the facts of life. No, anyways. So, we have to go on and go into the time period of some time before West was to have disappeared forever and gone on to do this mission with Flynn as Burton's Poid. So West was to go on and meet with Grace, who of course is to have been the person that West went on to, or no wait, Charisse had went on to kill Grace with those insects. So West was to go on and meet up with Grace, and they seemed to be old friends. At one point, they had ended up together, and then they had separated. West ends up finding out that Grace was to end up with a man instead of a woman, and West is like, well, do you have kids? And Grace is like, yes. And so West is like, well, like who forced you into having, like, this man and these kids? Like, this doesn't seem to be you. So Grace then is to take West into her laboratory and is to further go on and explain to West what they're working on here. And so Grace ends up showcasing the bizarre, like, upside down pyramid mechanism that we ended up having, of course, Flynn scan her eye from episodes before. They go on and explain that this thing is to be this like God fund or something like that. Like, they basically say that this mechanism has all of this data that seems to be like, this is to be like some like supercomputer that has more data than anyone else does for some bizarre reason. And so Grace goes on to explain that they are finding things out while using this mechanism. And so, come to find out, Grace is to show Wes this experiment of all of these military men that are doing this operation, and it looks like some operation is to showcase Burton and a number of other guys. And so Grace is to mention that there is an operation where Grace is to introduce a wounded dog into these guys' mission to kind of see if these guys would go on and try to help the dog or not. Because the dog is yelping, it's in pain, yada yada yada. So, come to find out, one of the military guys went off to go and help the dog, and he ends up dying for his trouble. And then we have another military guy that ends up going to that one injured one. And again, like, we just start to see like the pattern of, I'm assuming, everyone just starts to die after that. So we go on to have Grace tell Wes that, like, well, like violence stops violence. And so we have Grace to like set up here that they have, like, they're basically making like a trap that'll have everybody psychologically just like succumb to whatever it is. So Wes and Grace then leave, and so they go into this elevator, and we already have Marion exiting this elevator, and she then turns to realize that Wes does not have access to this part of the facility. And Grace is just like, well, like, Wes is an old friend of mine, and like, I have access, so that's why she's here. And so Wes ends up turning to Marion and tells her, it's like, well, hey, like, you have the most beautiful eyes. Like, I would kill to have eyes like you do. And come to find out, that's a whole foreshadowing moment, because we find out that that woman, Mariel, is to get her eye pulled out. It's the same girl from episodes before. So, coincidentally, we have Flynn, who had to go on and get to that one girl. It wasn't just some accident or like some by chance. We had West, who was basically forcing Flynn to go and find this one woman to get her eye being pulled. So, yeah, like, so it was all planned ahead of time. So, West went on and did these missions after going and knowing all about this. So, we have West and we have Grace, and so we have Grace, who is talking to West about like these weird, goofy like analogies where Grace had mentioned that she'd gone on and after time like seen a therapist, and the therapist had mentioned that West, or that Grace and West were either bad at being good or good at being bad, and goofy analogies like that. Having Grace state that when West was kind of looking at this experiment and realizing how bad it could be, Grace turns to West and is like, well, see, like, you're trying to be good here, but you're a bad person. So we have Grace and we have West going into all this dialogue that in all honesty is just to foreshadow a number of things. But really, a lot of the dialogue that both West and Grace have seemed meaningless to me. It's just kind of catching up stuff that really wasn't a catching up thing for me. So, with that said, let's push on. So, now let's go on and talk about what's going on in Flynn's part of the world. So, we have an assassin named Bob who ends up getting this phone call. And so, first, Bob goes on and gets this box. He ends up getting this box that has the weapon that is to be from the future, that when he pushes it, it ends up having this concussive blast. So Bob ends up getting this weapon. He tries the weapon and he realizes that he breaks like a big part of his house while having this thing blast out this sonic blast. So Bob then goes on and gets this phone call and ends up being Daniel from the future. So Daniel is giving Bob a little jingling, you know what I'm saying? And a little jingle in the year 2032. And so Daniel is telling Bob that he needs to go on and do this assassination job and is going to get $10 million in total. He'll get like some now, but the rest of it later. And Bob is like, I'm sorry, but you've called the wrong number. Like, this is not who you think that it is. And Daniel's like, oh no, I know who this is. Like, I know that this is you. Like, and so we have Daniel that tells Bob, it's like, well, hey, like, if you're not willing to go on and do this job, like, I'm sure that I can go on and give your daughter a call, and, like, I'm sure that you'd be more than willing to do this job then now, wouldn't you? So, we have Bob that's like, oh my god, somebody knows about my daughter. So, we then have Bob that ends up going to this bowling alley. So Bob ends up going to this bowling alley to meet with an old friend of his, and that old friend has a number of sons that are all with him. And so Bob ends up talking to his old buddy and is stating like, well, hey, like, you shouldn't have told them about like my daughter. And the guy is like, well, I'm sorry. It's like, if anything, it was either mention her or like something would have happened like to this guy. Something would happen to him or his family or something like that. So we then go on to have Bob, who whips out this gun and just starts killing the guy next to him, and then shoots the person behind the counter who has his gun. And then Bob goes on to start killing all of the sons of this guy. So Bob then leaves this bowling alley, and one of the sons make it out of the bowling alley, and Bob, who of course had gotten his car pretty shot up, goes on to drop to the ground and is using this future weapon to blast and drop one of his friend's sons down to the ground. So Bob then goes on to see this guy and states, is like, well, hey man, you really should have just like pretended you were dead. Like, I wouldn't have came back for you. So like, Bob gives this guy a chance. Bob states that, like, well, I'm going to go on and see if my car can start because of what you just did to it. And if you just so happen to go on and slink away and you get out of here, then bygones be bygones. And the guy states, it's like, well, my legs are broken. And so Bob is like, well, that's too bad because also your arm is broken pretty badly too. So by the time Bob gets in his car, starts his engine, and seems like his car works, Bob then runs over the one guy that was still left alive onto the ground. So we have Bob that is to find out from these people that he takes this assignment for, that Bob is to need to know, like, okay, like, who is it and where are they? So Bob ends up finding out that he's going after Flynn, and Flynn is going to a doctor's appointment to get a scan done, and then Bob will get to her after she is on the road. So we have Flynn that goes on and gets this body scan. So come to find out, the doctor finds out from Flynn that she is having some infection. And we have to have this doctor go in and kind of drain the infection to kind of see like what kind of infection that Flynn is having. I guess it's something coming like right from where you would like start to see. And so, but like they end up like stabbing her into like the back somewhere, like maybe by the bone marrow or something. So they start draining this, and they're like, okay, we'll figure out what this infection is at some point. Maybe Flynn is going on and getting some illness which will lead to the jackpot. Maybe she starts it all. Maybe she's going to be the one that starts the world to end. That's what I'm assuming, because it would make all the sense in the world. Like, it would almost be like the one Utopia show, where we go on and the whole goal of the show is to have, at some point, somebody come down with like the worst illness and then there is no cure, and so the whole world just destroys itself out of being sick and not having this antiviral thing to combat it. So we have Flynn that goes on to like hold her brother's hand while she gets hit with this thing. So she gets stabbed into and have this thing drained out of her. So we now have Flynn and Burton, who are driving along, making their way back home. And so we have Billy Ann Baker that is to pull off to the side of the road because someone is to have car trouble. So Billy ends up finding out that that character actually is Bob, and so Bob is stating like, yeah, there's something wrong with my engine, and like I've already called somebody, and Billy Ann's just like, well, you know what, I'm really good with engines too, and I think I can probably help you out. And we of course have Bob, who's just like, no, like I'm gonna go on and get like the other guy, Charlie or whoever that ends up being. I'm gonna have him just kind of fix my car. Like I'm fine with it. And so Billy Ann's like, well, hey, like I get that I'm like a female and there's this whole stereotype, and Bob's like, no, it's not that at all. So Billy Ann just drives away, but then she stops and she's like, you know what, like I just really need you to see this engine. And so we have Bob, who's just like, okay, like, all right. So And we have Bob, who's like rearing with this like future weapon. So we all of a sudden have Flynn and Burton show up, and so they're getting out of the car, and they're like, okay, like, what's going on here? So Bob ends up using his like sonic blast weapon to take out this car, while Flynn and Burton try and start to like drive like crazy to get out of here. And immediately we also had Flynn, who was telling Burton to shoot Bob, because she recognized the feature weapon because Bob had it on like the side of his hand. So Burton was like, what is Flynn talking about? Like, I don't know who this guy is. And so we have Flynn and Burton, who crashed their car. Bob is going after them, and Billy Ann ends up shooting Bob with a shotgun, but he has a bulletproof vest underneath, so it seems that he's fine. So now that Bob is kind of taken care of, technically, we have Constantine then ends up pulling up, and he arrests Bob, he zip ties him, and puts him in the back of his car. So now we have Constantine that is asking Flynn, I'm like, okay, like, Constantine really is to start to realize that things do not add up. Things don't make sense. So Constantine is to tell Flynn, it's like, well, like, you know what? Like, I remember you and me when we were little kids, and like, I remember you used to be this girl, and so, like, now I'm starting to ask, like, hey, like, where is this girl at? Like, where is this girl that I used to know? And Constantine is to also state to, like, Flynn, it's like, when, like, and why is Burton, uh, like, having a gun to his hip, and, like, he's having drones flying around, like, what's going on here? None of this makes sense. And Flynn, of course, doesn't really have an answer. And so Constantine's like, okay, all right. Like, well, excuse me. Constantine's like, well, there's nothing I can do. Like, if you won't tell me what's going on, because you're telling everybody else, it seems. So we have also a scene where, so that way this can continue the Billy Ann Baker story anyways. Billy Ann Baker was to find the big stack of money that Jasper had gotten episodes before. Billy Ann now asked Jasper, when she was at home before she goes out, to help both Flynn and Burton. Billy Ann goes on to talk with Jasper. It's like, well, hey, where'd you get this big stack of money from? And Jasper ends up stating, like, well, yeah, I got it from my dad. And Billy's like, well, hey, wait a minute. Like, so what are you going to do for him? And Jasper's like, no, 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 no. Like, I just got the money just because my dad just wanted to give this to me. He was like, hey, man, like, hard work pays off, and here you go. And so that's obviously not what happened in prior episodes. Jasper is having to look into both Flynn and Burton, but he's not going to just go on and tell Billy Ann Baker that. So Billy Ann ends up going on and accepting what Jasper is to state here. But so Billy Ann Baker ends up going on to talk to Flynn and Burton as she's driving them home. So Burton, of course, is to state that he doesn't think that he can go on and trust Jasper or maybe even Billy Ann. And Billy Ann's like, dude, like, I almost just took, like, bullets for you. Like, I just saved your guy's life. If anything, like, you guys should be, like, thanking me right now instead of accusing me of anything. And, like, this should give me all the brownie points in the world to say that I have your back and, like, I can be trusted. So, and plus also, Billy Ann has been told by Flynn what all is really going on. So, all the more reason for Billy Ann to be trusted. Harvey Dent, can we trust him? The Dark Knight. So, we have both Flynn and we have both Burton who make their way home. So, come to find out that, of course, is when Flynn and Burton's mother find out about the dead bodies. And so when Flynn's mother goes on and starts asking this guy, we then have both Flynn and Burton who have to tell Flynn's mother the whole story about what's going on, every little bit of it. And so Flynn's mother is to come up with this whole like story from her past about how like maybe they should not go on and trust like what all like the future people are telling them or whatever, that like they should really maybe figure out like what's really going on here, so on and so, you know. So we have Flynn that's like, okay, like we need to finally just do something. Like we can't just go on and just kind of be stuck in the middle and really not go on and like do anything impactful. So Flynn is deciding that she's going to go in and be the Poid and make a more impact. And Burton's just like, well, hey, like you don't know what that's doing to your body and continuing to go in there. And so Flynn's like, yeah, I get that, but still, like we have to go on and we still have to do something. So I'm trying to think here if there's anything really left that I have to go on and kind of go into here. Yeah. I think everything's covered. Good. So, because this is honestly kind of much more easier episodes than other ones in the past where it's like the jackpot and let's talk about everything that happens and like disease and all these crazy events and whatever. Whereas this episode, it's like, okay, there's a lot more action, so that means I don't have to go on and state so many things. The only things that I didn't remember or didn't know who like Bob was talking to in the bowling alley, I didn't know who that really was because I didn't hear it be stated or whatever. But anyways, so we have Flynn that ends up appearing in front of Wilf, and so Flynn ends up going on and talking to Wilf to state that she wants to go on and she wants to talk to Charisse. And so Wilf is just like, well, like I don't think that that's a good decision because, like, man, you're going to have to go on and you're going to have to do something, like, really serious here to make sure that they get the message. And Flynn's like, yeah, I think I can come up with that when things need to. And, like, Wilf is like, no, I don't think you get it. So Wilf goes on and he explains how he was to get tied with Lev, because Wilf would go on to explain that when like the jackpot was going on, and Wilf of course was to be like sent where he was sent, Wilf was to have taken this knife without anybody noticing, and Wilf went on to stab one of the people and then took a gun from one of them and shot all the other groups that were kind of going against them. So for those of you of which that like don't understand what I'm stating, the moment where we had Wilf in the flashback where Wilf was with young West and all those guys kind of come out of the woodwork, and like Wilf is now having to decide between West and these guys that are come barreling in on these people. We had Wilf that goes on to take this knife and starts killing them because like it's either Wilf or them. So Wilf killed all of them. Killed all of them. So Flynn goes on and is to go into the building that Charisse is in. So Flynn is to tell the person like behind the counter, it's like, well, hey, like, have you already scanned me in, basically, like knowing that I am who I am? And they're like, yeah. And so it's like, okay, well, like, I won't need any help from you. I just need to find out where Charisse is. So Flynn goes on to find Charisse, and like both of them are just having this conversation just out in the open. And so what happens in this conversation is that they kind of threaten one another back and forth. And so we have Charisse stating that's like, well, hey, like, I'm unemployed. Like, I'm in a peripheral. Like, what are you really going to do to me? And so Flynn states, like, well, like, even if I go on and if I kill your peripheral right here and now, like, I'm going to go on and I'm coming for you. So we have both Charisse and Flynn fight it out, duke it out, and there's some pretty good fights here. I don't know why in every like fight sequence there always has to be an armbar being thrown. Like, I guess for people who have seen like UFC, I guess that's like the common like battle thing to do. But I just went on and saw like the Winchester episodes, one of those, where they're doing like an armbar submission on one of the people. But so Flynn and Charisse end up fighting here. This all leads to an armbar submission, but then Flynn goes on to then snap the neck of Charisse and kill off which is to be just her peripheral. So Flynn then goes on to leave this building, and so she's stating like she's making a statement here. She's wanting to like put forth some impact, and she is like coming for the people who have been coming for her for a number of episodes now. So with that said, I think that covers most of this, but let me get the whole Constantine thing out. So we have Constantine, who is driving with Bob in the back seat of his cop car. So while Constantine is just driving along, we have Bob who's going on and stating that Constantine is to, of course, be really interested in what's really going on. And Constantine is obviously very curious because, of course, with him being a officer of the law and always being kind of curious to and have something that he doesn't quite understand, he's kind of left out compared to everyone else. Yada yada yada. So Bob goes on and it's to state to Constantine, it's like, well, hey, like, how about this? Like, how about I go on and give you $2.5 million, and I keep the rest of my payment when I go on and kill like Flynn and Burton, and you can go on and know what's really going on. And immediately when Constantine is to come up with like, well, you know what I say to that? All of a sudden we end up getting an invisible car that comes out of nowhere, like Wanda with Wonder Woman, it seems. Whoever's in these invisible cars, I don't know. They don't showcase who it really is. I'm assuming it's probably Pickett from, because why not have that guy have these cars from the past? Maybe he was a part of those assassination guys the whole entire time. Wouldn't that be an interesting kind of story to play out here? So we have a man in an invisible car who ends up dragging Bob out of this vehicle, and as Constantine is to try and get himself out of his own car accident, we by the time Constantine is to try to see who that guy was helping Bob, the guy gets into his car and drives away, and so Constantine doesn't know who it is because it's an invisible car. So the invisible car goes and T-bones Constantine's car, which flips his car, and so like Bob gets dragged, and Constantine is kind of getting out of his car by his own power, and is to just go on like, what the heck happened here? So that's of course how this episode to me really ends. I know like the whole Flynn and Sherry's thing was like the real ending of the episode, but I think that the Constantine thing like made a lot more sense to end the episode that way. So with that said, let me know in the comments below how you felt about this episode, whether you liked it, whether you hated it, where you're still like, I don't like this show for whatever goofy reason. Let me know how you feel about this show, because some people will probably state that this show really does suck. I don't know. Like, I would state that waiting for this show to get good freaking sucks. I would really state that I don't really feel like this show like knows like what it needs to do. Like the most interesting parts were like stuff that they kind of quickly like got rid of in the show. And I was like, you know what, you should have like stuck with the one idea and made a whole season about it, instead of just going on and just stating like, well, no, we just want to bore people to death with like stretching out dialogue. And so yeah, like it feels like they're still doing that. It feels like they're still trying to stretch the show out with dialogue. And so I'm like, what if they like just run out of stories to tell in this show? It feels like they're already doing that. So like, I don't know if this show is really going to last one season. I don't think that they'll have more story to tell somewhere down the road, because it doesn't really feel like that now. So yeah, like, so we'll see where this show goes. I'm still gonna watch it because I was kind of waiting for some kind of episode to be like, yeah, yeah. I was hoping for there to be some interesting thing that came out of that whole story. So, oh, we also had the time where Bob goes on and calls his daughter, and is to tell her that her subscription for some company is no longer valid. That Bob is no longer going to go on and be involved in his daughter's life, but he's saying it in code. And so Bob's daughter is telling Bob, it's like, well, hey, like, I'm pregnant, and I'm this, and I'm that. And Bob is like, well, I'm sorry, but, like, still, like, I have to just, like, kind of cut things off. So, yeah, so with that said, like, to me, like, a lot of stuff that they were doing with Bob, I'm like, this just feels like Jeff Bridges from The Old Man. Because I went on and saw, like, a couple episodes of that show, and I'm like, okay, like, so anything that happens from now on in is probably going to get compared to the Jeff Bridges The Old Man show, and I didn't watch the whole thing, but, like, I watched, like, the kind of the early stages of it, and I kind of felt like, man, like, they're really trying to go on and have a lot of shows be like the Jeff Bridges show, The Old Man. So if you've never gone on and seen that show, check it out. But I'm going to check my way out of here so I can kind of try and make this video as short as possible. So let me know in the comments below anything, whatever. Just say the word black. And I'm like, great. Because I'll be like, okay, I don't know why somebody said black, because I'll probably forget whatever I was to go on and tell people to do. So without further ado, bye everybody. Bye everybody.